The film opens with Ryan, a man who looks like an older version of John Connor, stepping out of an airport somewhere in Latin America. Struggling to communicate with the local taxi drivers, he finally spots a driver waiting for him. Inside the car, he receives a message from Jack, apologizing for not meeting him personally and providing the code to his house. Ryan makes himself at home, enjoying a quiet dinner while waiting. When Jack finally arrives, he reveals that the house isn't actually his. It's a temporary rental provided by an agency for an upcoming event. The two old friends reminisce about their past and their shared profession as chefs. The next morning, Jack invites Ryan for a scenic morning run before they take a drive into the nearest town, where poverty lines the streets. Stopping at a small eatery, they continue their conversation over food. Soon, they are joined by Alice, a tourist exploring exotic destinations. To settle a friendly debate over who is the better cook, they challenge her to a blind taste test. She samples the same dish from both of them, ultimately declaring Ryan the winner. Later, after a swim in the pool, Ryan jokingly swipes Jack's watch, the same watch Jack once lost to him in a card game. But despite his small victory, he feels an underlying tension when Alice chooses to spend the night with Jack instead of him. His frustration grows the next morning when he receives a threatening message, a reminder that no matter how far he runs, his past will catch up to him. Jack casually mentions that he took Alice to a hotel and now has work to do, leaving Ryan alone. Oddly enough, Ryan doesn't mind. He seizes the opportunity to log into Jack's bank account through his laptop, discovering that his friend has over £1.5 million in his account. With a heavy sigh, Ryan logs out and wipes the browsing history. That evening, after Jack returns, the two share dinner by the pool, smoke some and ponder the meaning of life. But the next morning, everything changes. Ryan finds Jack hanging from a rope, dead. Processing the shock, a cunning plan begins to form in his mind, one that could solve all of his problems. With careful precision, he lays out a plastic sheet, cuts Jack down, and resets his phone to factory settings. He then calls the bank, pretending to be Jack, claiming to have suffered memory loss after an accident and requesting a password reset. Luckily, he has Jack's bank card on hand. But there's a catch. He must visit the bank in person in London with valid ID to gain full access to the account. Thinking fast, Ryan orders a fake driver's license from a Chinese website using Jack's name but his own photo. He then books a flight to London. Meanwhile, his creditor, the man he owes a massive debt to, calls again, threatening harm to Ryan's mother. Desperate, Ryan buys himself another week, promising an extra £50,000 on top of what he already owes. With time running out, he gets to work covering his tracks. He drags Jack's body to a nearby lake, tying weights to it before letting it sink beneath the water. After dragging his friend's body far enough into the water, Ryan does to him what Disney did to the Star Wars franchise. He sinks it to the bottom. The next day, his creditor changes his mind. He now demands £50,000 within 2 days, or Ryan's mother will be joining his grandmother and the rest of the family in heaven. Desperate, Ryan starts calling everyone he knows, promising to return the money doubled, even tripled. But no one is willing to take that risk, knowing his history with gambling. Returning home from town, Ryan finds unexpected visitors, Imogen and Maurice, event organizers from the agency. They mistake him for Jack, and Ryan, quick on his feet, plays along, even requesting an advance payment. Lucky for him, the fee for this event is a whopping £300,000. Imogen transfers the money directly to his creditor's account, then asks if everything is ready for the event. Ryan, having no clue what's supposed to happen, starts asking leading questions to piece things together. He soon learns that the dinner is tomorrow, and he hasn't prepared a thing. Frustrated, Imogen insists they visit a church to pick out 2 meat options from among the parishioners, people who take care of their health. The time for screening them for diseases and drugs has already passed, and that's when it finally clicks. Ryan now understands why Jack was making so much money per dinner and why he always seemed weighed down by guilt. He wasn't cooking ordinary meals. He was preparing something far more disturbing. Imogen makes it clear, if he doesn't serve the long-legged pig by tomorrow, his own time on Earth will be cut short. Realizing he has no way out, Ryan agrees. To calm his nerves, Imogen lays out the numbers. The agency is responsible for about 75 deaths a year. 50 of them are eaten, while the rest are collateral damage. But part of the profits go toward improving the infrastructure of the community, funding essentials like clean water, compared to oil companies where over 100 workers die annually, not to mention the environmental damage. This operation seems almost sustainable. Not knowing who to choose, Ryan randomly points at a young woman and her mother. He and Morris quietly tail them through the city, but when the women reach their neighborhood, they lose track of them. Just then, a local mechanic, Jose, notices the lost pair and offers to help. Maurice glances at Ryan, silently confirming that Jose will do just fine. He leads the man toward their car, claiming it broke down. As Jose crawls underneath to check, Maurice calmly attaches a silencer to his pistol and shoots him. They're about to drag the body away when a patrol car pulls up with the same police officer they saw at the church and the two women they had been following. Thinking fast, Maurice introduces himself as an assistant architect, claiming they're scouting locations for a new hotel. Satisfied, the officer lets them go. Back at the house, they decide to settle for just one body to avoid further complications. Together with Imogen, they haul the corpse into a hidden basement, where Maurice strings it up by the legs. Now, it's Ryan's turn to step up. Under the watchful eyes of his employers, he hesitates, then picks up a knife. With no other choice, he slits the man's throat, watching as the blood drains out. Leaving Ryan alone to work on the body.
Oh, and make sure that you harvest the tongue.
Imogen and Maurice head off to prepare the house for their high-profile dinner guests. After butchering the body covered in blood, Ryan heads to wash away both the stains and his sins, while Maurice carries out trays of their grotesque delicacies. But there's at least one piece of good news. His package from China has arrived. Inside, he finds the fake driver's license. Comparing it to Jack's real ID, Ryan makes sure the forgery is convincing before quietly gathering his things and slipping out to the car. Under the puzzled stares of the gardeners, he starts driving away, but in his panic, he accidentally hits one of the workers. The crash draws Morris's attention. Thinking fast, Ryan lies, saying the handbrake failed. But Morris, unfazed, reminds him that the organization has long arms. If Ryan runs, they will find him. As they push the car back into place, Ryan starts probing. He asks how someone like Maurice can live with a job like this. More importantly, how does one quit without ending up 6 feet under? Maurice shares a story. Once, a woman asked for a private meeting with management instead of taking her end-of-year bonus. After that, she sent Maurice a letter saying she had officially resigned and was now a personal chef for a wealthy family. He never heard from her again. Realizing that escape isn't an option, Ryan gets to work on the menu. He finalizes it with Imogen, and with just 3 hours until the first course, begins cooking. By nightfall, the first guests start arriving, dressed in elegant evening attire. But the sophisticated atmosphere is suddenly interrupted by the arrival of the police, Officer Gallia and Detective Ruiz. They're here to ask about the disappearance of Jose. Imogen welcomes them with a polite smile, sticking to the cover story about the construction business. But getting rid of Detective Ruiz won't be so easy. The missing man was his nephew, and he's taking this case personally. Imogen leads the officers to Ryan, who plays along. Cooking is just a hobby, he claims. By trade, he's an architect, and if needed, he can even drive a cab on the side. Ruiz, sharp-eyed and skeptical, tests him with a few casual questions, looking for inconsistencies. Meanwhile, Imogen, always thinking ahead, invites him to stay for a meal. With cruel irony, she offers him a bowl of soup, made from none other than his missing nephew. While the detective eats, Imogen pulls Ryan aside. Furious, she scolds him for his sloppy act. The agency has 3 specific protocols in case of police involvement, and he's failing at every one of them. His lack of knowledge about architecture is putting the whole event at risk. As more guests arrive and the first course is served, Ruiz finishes his meal and prepares to leave. But just as he's about to step out, something clicks in his mind. Imogen had casually suggested that Jose might have gone on a sudden, unplanned trip. That phrase lingers in Ruiz's head. It's the exact wording used in emails sent by young people who mysteriously disappear in the area. Emails that always arrive a few weeks later, reassuring their families that they're fine. And just like that, Ruiz stops at the door, his instincts telling him something isn't right. Considering everything he just learned, details he was unaware of since he worked in another city, Detective Ruiz decides to stay and get to the bottom of things. As he and Officer Gallia exchange pleasantries with the guests and prepare to leave, one of them unexpectedly invites them to join the dinner. Ruiz accepts the offer, while a clearly irritated Imogen pulls the overly hospitable guest aside for a private word. The man explains that he enjoys the thrill, the risk of getting caught, the possibility of being exposed. He lives for the danger. Before Imogen can deal with him, another unplanned problem arrives. Alice, the wandering tourist from before, shows up at the house. Imogen tries to send her on her way, but Alice asks to use the restroom, unwilling to room in the pristine garden with a less than graceful moment. With no other option, Imogen lets her in and leads her toward the kitchen, instructing Ryan to take care of her. Meanwhile, she sees Officer Gallia off, but there's a problem. Imogen believes Ryan is Jack, while Alice knows that's not true.
So what's going on? Where's Jack?
Ryan admits that he's covering for his friend, but avoids explaining why. Alice grows suspicious, demanding to know where Jack is. Ryan, flustered, tries to usher her out as quickly as possible, but just as she turns to leave, her eyes land on something: Jack's watch on Ryan's wrist. Then, her gaze drifts to a pot simmering on the stove, filled with a thick, deep red liquid. Her stomach twists as a horrifying thought creeps into her mind. Ryan tries to explain, claiming Jack gifted him the watch before leaving, but the unease in Alice's expression doesn't fade. As she steps outside to her car, Detective Ruiz, still at the table, continues chatting with the guests.
So what do you think has happened to Jose?
They all know exactly what's in the food, and their barely restrained amusement makes the entire exchange feel eerily unsettling. Ruiz, savoring his meal, praises the dish and casually asks what it's made of. He then signals a waiter to fetch the chef. Meanwhile, Ryan privately asks Imogen how he can contact the agency, how he can leave this nightmare behind. She gives him a cold, honest answer.
You can't.
Even the chef Maurice once mentioned, she didn't escape either. On her final dinner, she wasn't cooking the meal. She was the meal. Stunned and horrified, Ryan is suddenly pulled back to reality when the guests call him over to applaud his exceptional cooking. Ruiz once again asks what the dish was made of. Ryan forces a smile and answers,
Pork.
Back in the kitchen, Ryan prepares dessert when Alice suddenly walks in again. Her car won't start, and Maurice has offered to drive her back to town. As he slices into the tongue of the unfortunate Jose, Ryan notices something: herpes sores. A problem. The guests requested tongue for dessert, but this one's off the menu. Imogen, always pragmatic, offers a chilling alternative. Why not use your own? Before Ryan can react, Alice unknowingly walks back in, alone, far from home, with no one expecting her return. Later, as dessert is served, Ryan discreetly slips Detective Ruiz a note. They meet in the bathroom, where Ryan finally spills everything: the truth about Jose's fate. Ruiz clenches his jaw, barely holding in his anger. But before they can act, a knock sounds at the door.
Detective?
Imogen. Ruiz quickly composes himself. Feigning an upset stomach, he excuses himself, thanks the hosts, and leaves. Or so they think. The moment Maurice's eyes are off him, the detective circles back, slipping into the shadows. Ryan leads him to a hidden basement, revealing the grisly truth: Jose's remains, and Alice's. Ruiz reaches for his phone to call for backup, but he left it in the kitchen. Worse, he doesn't remember any of his colleagues' numbers by heart. With no other choice, he tells Ryan to retrieve his phone while he waits outside in the garden. But Morris isn't stupid. Sensing something off, he follows Ryan and silently makes his way to the garden. Instead of confronting the detective, he takes a more direct approach, slipping through a second entrance into the basement. Ruiz never sees it coming. The roar of a chainsaw shatters the silence as Maurice brutally slices through the detective, ending the investigation in seconds. By the time Ryan returns, the only thing left of Ruiz is a mess to clean up. Maurice, as casual as ever, hands him a blade. Get rid of the evidence, chop it up, boil the remains, and bury the bones in the pit. Meanwhile, Imogen drafts an email to Ruiz's sister, crafting a believable excuse for his sudden disappearance. Something simple, something they've used before. He left town to chase a lead on Jose. The next morning, the three organizers sit down for breakfast, their latest problem already erased like it never existed. Imogen informs Ryan that demand for his cooking is skyrocketing worldwide. In just a month, they'll be doing it all over again. Before he leaves, Maurice injects a GPS tracker into his arm, replacing the previous one, which unfortunately registered Jack as deceased. A minor technical issue, but one that needed correcting. Now, fully stepping into his friend's identity, Ryan heads to the airport while behind him, Maurice sets Jack's old car ablaze, erasing yet another loose end. Seated at the airport bar, he strikes up a casual conversation with a fellow traveler. He talks about his job, leaving out the more gruesome details, of course. To an outsider, it sounds like a dream career. And when asked for his name, Ryan doesn't hesitate. He introduces himself as
Jack.
This is who he is now. This is his life until the very end.